Do you ever feel like you can't get ahead? That pretty much no matter what you do, you're stuck in the position you're in. You get paid a little bit more and then, well, the mortgage went up or the car payment went up or you got to pay something else that just broke. That is the position most Americans are in. And it's designed that way. And why do I smile? Because it's not really a surprise to me anymore. It used to be. I used to be in that boat that no matter what I did, no matter if I got paid a little bit more or my business a little bit more, that I would always be like basically back to net zero at the end of the month. And once you understand how that works, and let me walk you through it, you will be able to make better decisions. And that's really what this is all about. So if you look at, say you make your mortgage payment, say you make your car payment, right? What are you actually doing? You're making someone who's very wealthy wealthier, because you are paying for their asset. You are paying to finance their assets. You are their cash flow. And the entire system is designed to get you into debt and make sure you keep paying that debt until you die. That's why they put out the 30-year mortgage. Right? It wasn't let's make it more affordable for people. No, it's to make sure that the wealthy have a 30-year cash flow coming in from you. And therefore, they know exactly what they can do with that and how they can leverage that. So if you look at what the Fed's been doing, they've been pumping literally trillions of dollars into the system. What were they doing that? Well, they were propping up assets, financial assets, like, rocks here behind me, buildings. And the wealthiest Americans now own so much of the stock market, you can't believe it. The 10%, the top 10% now own 93% of all US stocks. The top 10% own 93% of all stocks. So the 90% own just 7%. Now, that sounds like fairly scary, but just look at the bottom 50%, which is half the frickin' country. They own 1%. 1%. So the wealth inequality is absolutely enormous. And is it surprising? Actually, no, I don't think it is. Will it ever change? No, it won't. But let me tell you in a moment what you can do about it. So you might think, okay, Felix, but the bottom 50%, maybe they don't invest in shares. Maybe they've got more money in savings accounts or CDs or government bonds or something. You think? They own 2.6% of the wealth. The bottom 50%, half the population, own 2.6% of the wealth. They're just screwed. They're just royally screwed unless they learn how to get out of it. And it's really learning that gets you out of it. It's not working harder. It's not getting the extra job. It's learning how to get out of it. So 42 million Americans live on food stamps, which is just pretty scary. Now, what do they buy with those food stamps? Coca-Cola, Sprite, soft drinks. There's a $135 billion government program that essentially feeds straight back to stocks like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and all that stuff. So what can you do? Well, you can own the stock. Yeah, because it sucks and it's unfair. And the companies are not ethical, they're not moral. And you could be like, God, I'm against it. Okay, move to a small island and live in a hut. If you're happy that way, brilliant, do that, okay? But if you want to live where you want to live, and that is the US for some reason, then it's a beautiful country, I get it. Then you got to make money out of that. You got to understand it. So owning something like Coca-Cola stock is probably something that could be done. Now, what else do they spend it on? It's candy, chips, frozen pizza, ice cream, cookies, and a lot of extremely processed crap. So again, own the processed crap producers. That's really what this is all about. And then, well, cost of living has gone through the roof so much since COVID. Why? Because the Fed printed all that money. And that money meant everything got more expensive. That caused inflation. It made housing more expensive, it made stocks more expensive, it made assets more expensive, and it made everything else more expensive. Why? Because companies said, there is inflation, let's raise prices. Pepsi raised their prices 17% last year. Do you think it cost 17% more to make that syrup and tap water? Probably not. But it was a good excuse to do it, and their margins went up. The stock market liked it. I own Pepsi stock. I was quite happy about it. I get it's not. It's morally vacuous, to put it very politely. So 40% of Americans live in poverty, essentially. Literally, they're the working poor. They're the wage slaves. They're the bonded wage slaves. You can't quit. Most people haven't got $500 to spare. If their car breaks, they don't know what to do about it. They don't know anything to do about it. And you might think, okay, I'm not quite in that position. And that's good. And that means you've done better than most. But at the same time, billionaires since COVID have gotten $3.3 trillion richer. 3.3 trillion. That's $3,300 billion richer. And why is that? Because they were taught how the system actually works. They're not necessarily smarter than you. They're not necessarily working harder than you. They weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth, most of them. They didn't have a connection that you don't have. Those are all excuses. Those are all myths. What actually has happened is that somebody sat them down, or they found out themselves, that explained to them how it actually frickin' works. That those who have assets make money, and those who don't get poorer and poorer and poorer. Because last year the stock market went up, what? 24% or something? I can't remember. You're not going to get a 4% pay rise. Like, no employer's going to do that. So it's a lose-lose if you're an employee. It's very as simple as that. Now, does that mean you should quit tomorrow? No, probably not, because the cash flow is your asset. The cash flow is the thing you get out of that. Now, if you spend all of that cash flow on car loans and mortgages and consumer things and everything else, then you haven't really achieved anything. But if you manage to take some of that income, some of that cash flow you have, your salary, and you invest it every week or every month, you are now joining the rich. You're joining the asset owners, right? Owning shares. Shares are an asset. But then the question becomes, so how can I accelerate this? And one way, what I learned the hard way, was that I could make my money work harder for me. I trade, right? You can also start side hustles. You can start businesses. I generally think that's a harder thing to do than to make your money work for you. It takes a lot more time. I trade like 2-3 hours a week, and it wouldn't take you any longer if you did what I did. And I'll teach it to you for free on Tuesday. Just come and join me. felixfrenzel.org/training, right? We're on a live training session. I give you the whole strategy. I give you the 3 steps. You will do some live training together. You see exactly what I do and how I do it. And if it's something you might be interested in doing, it's completely free of charge. Why? Because I've been there. I've been a wage slave. It sucked. I got to a position where I was injured. I couldn't work. And it was scary. It was scary. And if I had learned what I now know 10 years sooner, I would, I'd be tremendously better off. And I'm not doing too badly, I think. But I see people who figured this out much earlier. And of course, they've got a head start on you. So you're not going to change how governments run the world. You're not going to change the fact that Wall Street dominates your country. You're not going to change the fact that Coca-Cola is some sort of co-sponsor of the food stamp program, because those guys have figured it out. They own the system. They are the system. Now, then some of you are thinking, well, couldn't we fix this whole inflation thing and the whole Fed madness and the whole dollar thing, and we just go back to the gold standard, right? That's a common thing people throw out. And well, if you just let's just run through that. Okay, let's run through the gold standard. So gold has a sort of religious connotation for a lot of people, and I have some gold. I'm not against it in any way, shape, or form. But there is this conviction around it. But what makes the dollar the dominant currency in the world? It's the reserve currency, right? It's what every country in the world pretty much trades in dollar. I have a physical trading company, and we trade with people in Malaysia and Indonesia and African countries and in India and in the Middle East and Europe, and what are we charging? Dollars, US dollars. Why? Because we trust it. They trust it. It's easy to access. It's liquid. It's for all its madness, it's the most reliable currency there is out there, because everybody is even more mad than the Fed. So why did they get rid of the gold standard? Well, you only become a reserve currency by providing money to the rest of the world. So think this through. You're the US. You have all those dollar notes. This just makes, assume it's physical. Of course it isn't, but let's assume it's physical. And there is somebody like me in Hong Kong who wants to sell something or, pay for something, say from a supplier in Indonesia. I need dollars. So how does the US send me dollars? Well, they can't just send me the dollars. They basically need to buy something from, say, a company in Hong Kong and pay for that in dollars. Now the dollars are in Hong Kong. Now I can access the dollars. I can now pay somebody in Indonesia with the dollars. So what happens is that in order for the US to be this reserve currency and this dominant currency in the world, the US needs to be the largest importer. And they can't be the largest exporter. Why is the Chinese yuan, the renminbi, why isn't that a reserve currency? It's a very, very large economy. Because they're an exporter. So what are they doing? They are buying dollars, right? They're receiving dollars. They're selling something. And for that, they receive dollars. There isn't much Chinese currency around in the world because China isn't a very large importer, relatively speaking. So this idea that people have that we could control the dollar by going back to the gold standard, it doesn't really work. Because if you did that, well, you'd probably run out of gold. Very simply put, you'd run out of gold. So it's a nice idea, but if you want the US to be the #1 currency in the world, the US dollar, you can't have the gold standard at the same time. It doesn't work. The two are mutually exclusive. So most people, I think, would, given that choice, say, yeah, I'd rather the dollar be the preeminent currency in the world because it does give the US quite a lot of influence. It makes the US economy quite powerful. But it also means that the US is going to continue to run a massive trade deficit. The US is going to continue to be dependent on imports. Because if they turned it around, well, they'd hoover up all the dollars. You see what I'm saying? If the US, they're a very large oil and gas exporter now. Well, they've replaced Russia for the Europeans, right? No interest in that war whatsoever has anything to do with money. No. It's all about freedom and democracy. Yeah, right. When they're exporting all that natural gas to Europe now, what happens? The Europeans are sending them dollars. The dollar is back in the US. Lots of it. And therefore, there is less dollars around in Europe. So the amount of reserve currency being held by the Europeans into US dollars declines. And if you took that too far and really became, a dominant exporter, there wouldn't be any more dollars around in the world. And people would say, well, I can't get any dollars, so let's use euros or yen or sterling or whatever. And that's how you become a dominant currency. And go back in history, if I may indulge you. Remember the British Empire? I'm sitting in London right now. This whole area here was paid for by the British Empire. The pillaging of India, probably mostly. And why was the sterling, the British currency, the #1 currency in the world for so long? Because the UK was a massive importer of things from its colonies. And then they reprocessed it and did whatever with it. But that stopped, right? They were no longer that massive importer because they were no longer the center of the world, of about a fifth of the world, and they were no longer the largest economy. So sterling is relatively irrelevant nowadays. So that's your choice, right? So if you want to have no trade deficit and you want to have a gold standard, you become an irrelevant economy. If you want to maintain the influence that the US has currently, you got to maintain your status as a massive importer and therefore maintain the status as a reserve currency. And the gold standard is just something that people dream about. It's never going to happen. So I hope that's somewhat helpful. I hope that somewhat explains a few of the myths out there. And really, if you're only going to do one thing for yourself, like seriously, come and join me tomorrow. Just come and join me tomorrow. It's completely free of charge. felixfranz.org/training. And just see how a retired banker trades, who's a very, very lazy trader, how you can have zero knowledge, never owned a brokerage account before in your life, and how you could potentially do the same thing that I do. And it might just be the eye-opener that you need. It might be the thing that gets you over the line. It has done it for thousands of students of mine. And I wish you a beautiful day. Take care.
I set out on a mission to find an industry and then companies and stocks that I could buy and hold forever.